Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
As HR and recruiting leaders, we've had to get creative in our sourcing methods as the unemployment rate has declined and the job market has shifted in favor of the job candidate. Many of us have used in some form Boolean search, which has been an internet sourcing and recruiting staple for years, allowing recruiters to search databases, member lists, and candidate profiles. I have a great resource on how to conduct a Google X-ray over on the Workology podcast that we'll also link to in this podcast episode. But given that so many of us already know these search engine tricks, what's the next secret weapon for sourcing? Where can we find those hidden candidates that are in the depths of the internet? I wanted to bring in an expert to talk about sourcing on Reddit. Today I'm joined by Erin Matthews. She's a talent sourcer, blogger, and recruiting professional. She's a regular contributor to SourceCon and a public speaker who I'm excited to talk to about sourcing on Reddit. You're going to love it. Erin, welcome to the Workology podcast.
Thank you for having me on, Jessica. It's great to be here.
Let me talk to you first about your career. How did you end up in recruiting and specifically sourcing?
Well, like many sourcers and recruiters, I sort of fell into it. I would say that my first role in sourcing started about 6 years ago, and I wasn't exactly a recruiter. I was a student recruiter for a college, actually. So that's kind of where I got my start. And then I went on to working for a experiential marketing agency. So then I was hiring people like event staff and promo models. And then eventually I got into healthcare, and now I am in the e-commerce field.
We're always looking for a better way and a different way to reach new candidates. And you've written and also led webinars recently about sourcing on Reddit, specifically a 4-part deep dive into sourcing onto Reddit, which is on SourceCon, and we'll include a link to the series in the notes. What led you down the Reddit path?
Well, I've been a Redditor for 7 years now, and it's always been my most favorite fun waste of time. There's been a lot of hours that I've spent on Reddit purely for fun, but most recently it was back in September of 2018 when I attended SourceCon Atlanta, and I attended a roundtable with Greg Hawkes, and he had mentioned how he would source for people on forums like Quora. And I actually asked him if he had ever tried Reddit, because it's one big forum with several other subreddits within it. So it's 1.2 million communities in total. And I just kind of wanted to know if he had any experience or tips on that. And Greg is a pretty renowned person in our industry, and he said that he hadn't even touched it. And it's not surprising because not a lot of people in talent acquisition have. So I kind of took it on as a project myself to see what I could figure out. And I discovered a huge wealth of knowledge through my research over the next couple of months. So that's essentially what led me down that path.
So I've tried Reddit mostly to drive some website traffic to Workology.com, kind of having some conversations and, sharing of resources. But I think that when most people think of Reddit, they don't think of it for TA purposes. They think of it as news source and entertainment, and then kind of some, unsavory stuff. It's easy to be the butt of a joke on Reddit. When we're looking at maybe using Reddit, what do you think is the most important thing to consider when maybe diving in?
Well, the most important thing to consider is that it is not a platform that's primarily used for job searching. Sure, there are Redditors that are looking for jobs, and there are specific forums for that, but you really have to approach it in a different manner. And I always tell people that you have to genuinely be on Reddit if you're going to be successful in recruiting or sourcing talent on Reddit, because mostly Redditors are a very tough crowd. They absolutely despise spam and they value authenticity. And that's really why the first thing that they're going to do if they're suspicious of a post is they're going to look at your profile, see how long you've been on Reddit, look at your karma score, and they're going to put you through a lot of scrutiny if the only thing that you're ever posting is jobs.
That's interesting. So talk about the karma score for those maybe who aren't on Reddit or don't spend enough time on there.
Yeah, so Reddit is a platform that utilizes a voting system in order to make the top content rise to the top of the front page, and then the more low-quality content to fall to the bottom. So what a karma score is, every time that you post something on Reddit to any kind of subreddit, the users, there's little arrows next to the post. They either vote you up or vote you down. And if it gets upvoted, then it rises to the top of that subreddit or even the entire front page of Reddit. And each time you get a point added to your karma score. So essentially someone that has a higher karma score, it's an indication of how active they are on Reddit and how often they contribute to the community.
So this sounds a lot different than Facebook and LinkedIn. So we can't just send a bunch of private messages like maybe we are in mails on LinkedIn to Redditors and say, hey, are you interested about a job opportunity and XYZ? I looked at your profile. That's not going to fly.
Right. And even if there was capacity, I would never recommend doing that on Reddit. Because like I said, they specifically despise spam. And a lot of users on Reddit have sort of sworn off a lot of social media websites like Facebook or Instagram or even LinkedIn, because Reddit is text-based and it's primarily for people to go and share their ideas. What makes the talent community so rich on Reddit is the fact that there's a lot of people on there trying to get better at their craft. I initially started diving into Reddit to source for IT talent. I figured there were subreddits for things as specific as people that believe that giraffes aren't actual real animals. Then there had to at least be subreddits for programming languages. And it turned out that I was correct. And in my Reddit sourcing toolbox, I've actually indexed several dozen IT communities where people are going on there just to share their projects that they're working on or ask for help or advice if they're learning a new language. And essentially, it's a very rich talent community, and like I said, they've sworn off the traditional social media because of the superficiality of it. If you go on Facebook or if you go on Instagram, it's a lot of people posting the highlight reels of their life, whereas Reddit is much more authentic.
So if we are thinking about getting on Reddit, which I find all this fascinating, specifically that folks that are on Reddit might not be active on these other social networks that we might be spending time on. So how do you recommend that you build trust with these folks, especially these close-knit subreddits that you're talking about? How do we get out there and start engaging and commenting on them to reach that trust before we say, oh, hey, we have an opening? Or how do we engage them first before we talk to them about maybe a job or a position that we might have open?
Well, I really have to emphasize that recruiting on Reddit is not going to be for everyone. And every time that I bring up recruiting on Reddit, a lot of times the initial knee-jerk reaction is, how do I reach out? How do I engage? You need to slow down when it comes to engaging with anybody on Reddit. Like I said in the beginning, you have to genuinely be on Reddit for it to actually work. And that means having equal postings of your jobs as well as posts on other subreddits that maybe are interesting to you. There are subreddit communities for pretty much every subject imaginable. If you like hiking, if you play an instrument, if you're someone that likes to coupon, or if there's a certain brand that you're really passionate about. For example, there's a subreddit about the store Aldi, and that's probably one of the most passionate communities I've ever seen. People are sharing what they bought that week, and they're asking whether or not a certain product is good. So engaging in communities like that will show with your activity that you're an actual Redditor. Now, I actually say that if you can find the person outside of Reddit on other social profiles like LinkedIn, then I say you should reach out to them there. Because a lot of times people are very iffy about you reaching out to them directly on Reddit, because many people go there as a hideaway from all of the noise of other places. So, for example, IT professionals will often give away their identity pretty easily. If they're sharing their GitHub profile to show off a project that they're working on, oftentimes users will have their personal email right on their GitHub profile. So you can start the conversation by commenting on their projects that they're working on GitHub, rather than saying, I found you on Reddit. Especially because Reddit was founded on the premise that it's a anonymous sort of platform where you can discuss anything that you want. So they might get to thinking about other things that they posted in the past, and they'll say, do I really want to talk to this person that might be my future employer when they've seen my entire Reddit history? So it's a very delicate situation in terms of reaching out.
So it's a long game, not a short game. We can't just send our 70 emails to someone. We have to build that trust. It's going to take time. It might be 3 months. It might be 6 months before we can really build that trust with someone. And you're suggesting that we talk to them, maybe not necessarily on Reddit, but using one of the other social networks, or, engaging them on GitHub or somewhere else that they may be spending their time.
Yes, exactly. And I say as a recruiter that is just starting out on Reddit, there are certain places where you can genuinely give back to the community. There's a subreddit that is entirely about resumes. It's about people that are looking for help on their resumes, and obviously if they're looking for help on resumes, they're likely looking for a job. Now, what's great about that is although most of the users remove any of their contact information before posting up the resumes, if you're an experienced sourcer, you can turn that into a sourcing game and see if you can find their LinkedIn profile online. And I've been able to do that with quite a few people that I've found on resumes on that subreddit group.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast sponsored by my friends at Clear Company. We're talking about sourcing candidates on Reddit with Aaron Matthew.
This episode has been sponsored by Clear Company, a complete talent management software provider. Clear Company's software solutions include award-winning applicant tracking, onboarding, and performance management solutions. Hire, retain, and engage more top talent with Clear Company.
So we've talked about typical outreach, what you recommend. Have you done cold emails or picked up the phone? Any strategies like that with success, or is it just kind of these other social networks that you kind of play your sourcing game?
There are a few situations where I have directly messaged people, but it was in situations where they indicated that they were already looking for work. Usually candidates don't want, or passive candidates don't want to be bothered if they're just on Reddit discussing things. If they're, for example, the React.js subreddit, which React is a JavaScript library, and the community on Reddit is a very rich community. They have over 130,000 members. They actually have a monthly mega thread that is, it asks you to post, if you're an employer, where your jobs are. So they cluster all of the jobs into one thread so they're not spread throughout the community. And they also have a monthly thread for who's available. So if someone comments on the thread saying that they're an available developer that's looking for work, that's a situation where it is okay to reach out to them directly on Reddit to say, hey, I saw you're looking for work on the React.js subreddit. I'd love to talk with you. Here's my email. So I really only reach out directly on Reddit if they've given some sort of indication that they're looking for work.
Cool. What about Boolean? How are you using search, or what are the ways that you're finding these subreddits? Like, let's say we wanted to find a group of people who work in fintech, for example. How would we find these subreddits of these little pockets of people?
Well, you can go to the main page of Reddit and type it in exactly to see if there's a specific community for that. If not, I actually have 2 Boolean strings built out in my Reddit toolbox. Now, searching on Reddit is kind of tricky, actually. You can't use a regular search engine for it. For whatever reason, Google doesn't index Reddit as well as you might want it to. So I actually use a custom search engine that only X-rays Reddit. So, for example, I can use a Boolean string that searches within the URL that indexes Reddit users and comments, and then I can figure out if anybody has specifically said that programming language in any of their comments, and it will bring up any of those users that have ever said that. You can also X-ray by subject. I have that Boolean string also built out in my toolbox, so you could definitely search for a community like that using that string.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to your toolkit so that people can grab those search strings and the other resources that they need. This is fascinating. I feel like when I see Reddit and I see recruiters talking about Reddit, it's usually they're sharing screenshots of some job candidate that's flaming a recruiter and maybe how they're talking to them or engaging them or trying to chat with them on another social network. Aside from what you said, which was join groups and engage and do it over a period of time and then search and try to find those small pockets of people that you can kind of creep on and start to build those relationships. Do you have any other tips for sourcing and engaging and finding talent on Reddit that we might have not covered?
Well, yes, I would say that a big thing is be conscious of the climate in general of every community that you interact with. There are some subreddits that will specifically say in their rules that they don't want recruiters there. It's definitely getting a general feel for a couple of communities that will work best for you. You're never going to be able to interact with all of Reddit. It's just too big. But what I recommend is find 5 to 10 communities that you're going to interact with regularly and focus your attention there. Make sure they're receptive, follow their rules, and you should be in good shape if you go about it that way. But if you try to spam or do anything high volume, it's just not going to work out in your favor, and you very likely might end up on Recruiting Hell, which is a subreddit specifically for shaming recruiters, which I'm sure is what you were referencing before.
Yeah, I've seen, I haven't been in there, but I've seen several screenshots in a Facebook group about this particular subreddit. What about other ones? Maybe for HR pros, recruiters, or talent sourcers. Are there any subreddits for those groups? Maybe if you kind of want to be amongst friends on Reddit?
Well, there hasn't really been a group that has really been that active with a lot of members. There is one called Ask HR, but it's more of a place that people go to ask HR about difficult questions that they don't want to go to their own HR department about. So, they might ask like, what are the laws about this PTO policy in this specific state? And that's a place where HR professionals can go to give back and really help out other people that might be confused about certain HR laws.
Well, maybe it's time we start our own subreddit for
Reddit.
Reddit.
And you can.
Let's
can start
dive
a
in.
subreddit for anything.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to kind of talk with us. We're going to link to your ERE webinar, which I thought was really cool and just full of a lot of resources. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn, or they can also connect with me on Reddit if you want to see how I've interacted with the community. You could actually make it into a sourcing game to find me on Reddit. If you take a look at my LinkedIn profile, if you enter in enough keywords, it's actually not very difficult to find me on Reddit. So if you can, shoot me a message and say, hey, I heard you on the podcast. I found you on Reddit. It's kind of a fun game.
Game on. Let's see if anybody listening into this connects with you. I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to see if I still have the chops. Well, thank you again so much for chatting with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You may know Reddit.com is a place to get answers to your questions or find news. And memes, of course. You know those memes. You might not know that it is the 4th largest site online today. Erin's deep dive into sourcing on Reddit is a great example of the way that we could all be thinking about being creative in our sourcing and recruiting efforts and how to build candidate relationships. We will include links to her toolkit, her LinkedIn profile, and I hope you take her sourcing challenge. Can you find Erin and connect with her on Reddit using some work on LinkedIn? Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, sponsored by our friends at Clear Company. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and until next time, visit workology.com to listen to all your favorite podcast episodes.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller Merrill provided by TotalPicture.com.